Right, so this is work that was done at the University of Birmingham, and Blandine and Matthew, I think, are also around somewhere. So some of the questions, I've left the University of Birmingham, so I don't actually know the current state of this work. So I'm going to present what we had in the paper that was submitted. Anything beyond that, they'll be better able to answer the questions than I will. So we'll see. Oh, sorry, I've got this. I'm really not very good at this today. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is explain a little bit about what the title means. So, obviously, visualizations, you know what those are. For learning visualizations, some way of graphically displaying data about students' learning. Metacognitive support. We want to provide information that can help students reflect, monitor their learning, plan their learning, and enable them to make decisions based on what they see in the visualizations about their learning. A learner model, I guess those of you in this session will know what that is, but essentially a model of the learner's understanding or skills. Open learner model, that's where the visualizations come in, so our visualizations are of the learner model. A persuadable open learner model, that's where the student can look at the visualizations of their learning or their learner model and think, actually, that is not what's in my head, and they can disagree with it and try to get the system to change the data in the learner model. And I'll explain why in a little while. And introduction of learning visualizations and so on. What we're talking about here is introducing an open learner model, a system with these visualizations of learning, how we might introduce that to students. So it's not actually their use of it, but it's the stage before that. So I'll be briefly talking about learning visualizations and the difference between learning analytics dashboards and open learner models. Introduce the Lee's box open learner model, the visualizations, the persuasion, and an initial evaluation. And then some quick recommendations about introducing a persuadable open learner model and a questionnaire survey. So as I mentioned just now, we already have a lot of information about what happens when students have open learner models. They do use them, and they also say that they find them beneficial. So in general, most students will use them and are happy about using them. So we're taking a step back to find out, in cases where there's not a lot of support for students to use an open learner model, because most of the previous studies have been is not structured. Why students would use the visualizations? This had a very, very positive response. So everybody wanted to use them to plan what to do next. They wanted to use them also to compare levels across the topics, to think about their competencies, and to note strengths and difficulties that they had. So these are the actual data. And here, they wanted to especially look at evidence, regardless of whether they agreed or disagreed with the value. Also explaining their viewpoints to a lesser extent, but still around half of them, whether they agreed or disagreed, they still wanted to explain their point of view. And they wanted to discuss values and potentially change them, as you might expect if they disagreed, but also quite a reasonable proportion of them if they agreed with them. They still wanted to talk about them with the system. So, we already know that open learning models will be used when there is some kind of support to use them, so a good introduction session, maybe some lab sessions, also perhaps more advanced explanations available and help available. At this stage, we didn't really have any of that for these students, and it was used entirely in their own time. So we wanted to find out what would happen with students like this, whether they will recognise the potential utility of an open learner model. And what they said, as I've said just now, they would expect to use the simpler visualisations, maybe less use of what could be thought of as more complex ones, but we didn't actually ask them whether they thought they were complex or simple, so we don't know that for sure. And they would use multiple visualizations. So we are now a bit more confident that they will use it if they have no support, that they will use it in subjects that are not related to technology, and this is the first time we'd really tried that out. And of course, once they're inside the OLM, the Open Learner Model, their choices may change. They may use different visualizations, they may persuade differently than expected, but what we need to know is, will we be able to get them in there? And once they're in there, it doesn't matter if their choices change, as long as they use it. So as long as they initially engage, we think they will get the benefits that we've found many times from students who actually have used open learner models. So we can also include some other visualizations in addition to what we're recommending for having some simpler ones and having multiple ones, because for the particular context, there might be specific visualizations that an instructor thinks are particularly useful, and so they can encourage use of those as well once the students are inside. The students would use structured and unstructured. So we want to include at least one structured, at least until we know whether structure is a reason that the students chose to use it, but also to raise their awareness of structure, of the competency set that they're actually is relevant in their course. The metacognitive purposes were very high. So obviously we do want to provide evidence for the learner model data. That's not a new finding, that's been reported a lot before by various people. Provide a facility for self-explanation, but also even if you're not going to have persuasion in the learner model, because students expect to use that, and there are expected benefits from doing so, metacognitive benefits. Provide a discussion facility, again, students thought they would use that, and again we say, even if there's no persuasion in the learner model, if the learner model can support discussion, it might be useful to allow a student to talk about it with the system. Now, limitations, I'm sure you are probably quite angry, or at least a little bit disgruntled, because we haven't shown you a lot here. We haven't shown you system use. I haven't heard anyone shout that, but I thought maybe, yes, that's all very well, but your users hadn't done anything, haven't used it. And you're absolutely right. And also, we didn't give them support, whereas we know we should really do that. But this is what we were trying to find out. If we have users that don't have support, we know that users who've used an OLM can use it quite a lot and think it's beneficial. We think now that we would find that as long as you can introduce it appropriately, students who don't have the same support would adopt an open learner model and get the benefits from it. So what have we done? Not much, but we have done it. These are the people we wanted to reach. They weren't studying technology, they were learning Italian. We think that we can justify these points here, and obviously we've got a lot more to do with that, but that's where we were at the deadline for submission. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much.